Hey, friends, I'm Kirk.
And I'm Zach, and this is the Gardener's Companion podcast.
Each week we will have gardening tips
Potential pitfalls to avoid.
and a community where we can share, learn, and have fun growing together. And before we get too deep into this week's episode, wherever you are listening to this, if you would do us a giant solid and hit that rating, give us a review wherever you're watching or listening to this, it really helps people find the show. We've been really proud of what we've been putting out so far, so I'm excited to continue making these episodes for you guys. And this week we are going to talk about the life cycle of a plant in general. So this is a general life cycle of a plant. There are definitely exceptions to most of these categories, but in general, this is essentially the stages that each plant goes through.
And a lot of this came from we have a customer up at the store who was talking to us. I think that particular conversation was about like cucumbers or something like that. And she's like, "What did I do to my cucumber? It's just dying. It's not making it." And so I was like, "I mean, how long have you had it?" And she ended up telling us that it had been months. And so in
Mm-hmm.
the end, we were like, well, it's kind of just the end of its life cycle. And so we wanted to give people a light breakdown of kind of how these different stages work, the differences between them, and also kind of reassure everybody if you are growing some varieties of plants, dying is part of it. So we wanted to kind of give a breakdown on all this stuff. But yeah, we'll start out with as you would imagine, seeds. Seeds are pretty amazing. They
It
have
really
all
is.
they have all of the energy stored to kind of jumpstart their existence. And Kirk and I do microgreens, and the entire premise of that is just using that stored energy in that seed to get into that first phase of life, and then you take it. But yeah, basically, it has all of the everything it needs to go from think like a shelf stable, something that is stable and can hold all these nutrients. And inside is the embryo of that plant.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty amazing. That one, there's not a whole lot to talk about. For seed storage, I think we've talked about it, but in this stage, you want to keep them dry and cool if you want them to last for a long time. So if you
Yes.
have a seed box at home, if you can get that somewhere in the air conditioning and somewhere in some kind of a box where even like it's lower than kind of your ambient humidity in your house, that's the ideal way to store them.
Yeah, and so with a seed, all it really needs is enough moisture for the moisture to get through the cell walls and kind of start releasing the enzymes and stuff that are needed for that seed to start growing roots. Um, like Zach said, I became so much more uh, attuned to all of the nuances of doing seeds when we started with the microgreens. It's just so interesting to see, you know, I think the one that's so fascinating, I think we've talked about it on a previous episode, is like basil, where
Hmm.
and seeds like that will actually create like an outward gel or whatever to help trap all of that moisture in. It's just fascinating to see how nature um, does its own thing, and nature always finds a way.
I would say the most famous one people are also very familiar with, chia seeds, are
Mhm.
very similar. The premise of how that works is you get them wet and they stick to the outside of whatever random shaped clay pot they send you for the chia pet. And basically that's how that works.
And so the next step of a plant's life is seedling. So after germination, the seedling emerges from the soil. So this is the first leaves that come out of the dirt. Um, and they begin to develop its first leaves and they begin to photosynthesize. This is when the plant is kind of like taking its first steps. It's pretty important at this time that it does have access to light. Otherwise, it can get, as we've mentioned before, leggy, meaning really long and stretchy, looking for light. So it's really important at that stage that it has the right amount of light. Again, it depends on the type of plant, how much light it needs. Um, Also, at this stage, it needs water, but not a lot of water. Remember, it does not have very many roots at this stage. So it needs just shallow watering, but more often at this early stage.
This is one of those stages that it's sensitive to water. So if you let it dry out completely, they will die. If you keep them too wet, they will also die. So this is honestly one of the hardest stages that people have when they're trying to germinate seeds up at the shop. It's one of the things we hear all the time is having some failure rate in this stage, and that is just because of the sensitivity in both directions towards the water. And so that would be my main thing to say to keep an eye on at this stage is we like to tell people you want the soil moist, not wet, because basically you want there to be some water available, but you don't want them to be drowning in it, essentially. This also is a stage where if you have zero light, your plants are going to go crazy. They will start leaning over, they will start searching for it, they will get way longer than you want. And that also kind of it creates a weird structure on your plant, and it also makes it harder to step up because when they get really leggy like that, they tend to wanna fall over, and they don't do particularly well in the wind, and so this is definitely a time where once you see those seeds pop, you wanna give them, at first, gentle light, but then you wanna give them enough light so that they're not trying to reach for it or look for it anywhere.
Yeah, for sure. And then the next stage, and this is like one of the main stages of a plant's growth, this is vegetative growth. This is when the plant is beginning to mature. It is really starting to put on its foliage. It is photosynthesizing like crazy. This is when it's starting to build up its nutrients, its nutrient transport, being able to kind of transport nutrients all the way to the tips of the leaves. This is starting to where it's starting to build up so that it can enter its next stage. This is when it really needs a lot of sunlight for photosynthesis, consistent watering, and again, consistent watering, not overwatering or underwatering, but something that is just kind of consistent throughout. That's very important with the plant. I mean, a lot of different stresses that you can see on a plant are from inconsistent watering, whether that be it got too dry and then you watered it, or it got too wet, after a rain or something, and you continued to have your irrigation on or something like that. This is when it needs a lot of its nutrients, mainly nitrogen forward nutrients, so that it can put on more leaf mass and stuff like that. And then this is also where a lot of the root stuff happens. Like a lot of magic is happening underneath the soil during this stage.
Yeah, this one is, I would say, your main risk when you're in heavy vegetative growth is underfeeding. It's asking for a lot. And when I was doing some schoolwork on this, basically, there was some of these agricultural crops. So think at like a farm level for corn. There was a couple stages that they had narrowed down to essentially a couple weeks of what you're tracking. If they did not get enough nitrogen in those weeks, you would see percentage decrease in yield. And so this is a time where your plant is going to be asking for a lot of nitrogen because it's basically going to try and build out all this huge structure of the plant. It's going to try and put on all these leaves that are going to be essentially your solar panels for your plant that are just going to help funnel all that energy down. And so definitely keep an eye on and make sure that you have enough nitrogen available for your plant at this stage because it can really help you put on as much plant mass as you can so that you can have a great reproductive stage, which is our
Yes.
next one. And that's basically so there's kind of two pieces to it. The first piece of it is it's putting on those flowers. It's putting on a bunch of flower sites all over the plant. This can vary based on, so we'll get into the blurry parts of this after we get through the general things. But basically, in the reproductive stage, you are putting on flowers and you are putting on fruit. And your fruit contains the seeds that we were talking about, so that's why
Hmm.
it's the reproductive phase. It essentially allows that plant to pass those genetics on and to make another generation of plants. This is another one where you have some risk of if you under fertilize, you could have issues. If you don't have, this is the highest nutrient draw that your plant is ever going to have. This is a very risky time for the plant because of that too. A plant only has so much energy. And when it's doing something that's this energy intensive, like putting on a bunch of fruits and flowers, if things go wrong, this is where you can have pretty catastrophic effects of something going wrong. You definitely want to keep water to it, but this is another one of those ones where if you do too much, you can create strange problems.
Hmm.
And once you get fruit set and things like that, So a great example of this is tomatoes. We could just talk about that one specifically. When tomatoes are fruiting and flowering, you have a bunch of tomatoes on. You don't want that to dry out. That will mess out, it will mess up the texture, everything like that. If you get inconsistent on your watering, that can cause splitting, which I'm sure anybody who's grown tomatoes has experienced that and it drove them crazy. It also does with us. And a lot of times what happens there is if you have a thin skinned tomato and maybe it wasn't getting as much water as it wanted for a while. And then one day you go out there and you're like, oh, my tomatoes are super dry. Let me hit them. You water them really, really heavily. You can see them split that next day. It
Hmm.
just sends all that water up there and it will just split your
It's like
tomato.
a water balloon, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. The other side of this that you need to keep an eye on when you're in fruiting and flowering, you want insects in there to pollinate your flowers. But at the same time, once you have fruit set as well, the bugs and the general pests are going to be coming. And so this is definitely a time where I would start getting very particular about your pest spraying. And you want to keep on it, especially if you are growing organically. It is much better to do preventative pest spraying than it is to try and catch up. It's much, much more difficult.
Yeah, and another example of a deficiency, and I was thinking of tomatoes when you were talking about, is there's the plant is moving from vegetation to fruiting and flowering. There's like a shift that's happening here. So it's shifting from needing as much nitrogen, shifting into needing more phosphorus and potassium. But it also is in dire need of this is when it needs the calcium and the magnesium. And so, one of the things that a plant will tell you pretty quickly when you're growing tomatoes in particular is whether or not you have enough calcium in your
Mhm.
soil, because there's something called blossom end rot. So you'll get a fruit starting to form, and then right at the end of the fruit, it will literally start decaying, and it just goes bad. And it just means that your plant, it doesn't have enough nutrients to transport that nutrients up and down the plant to be able to hold on to the fruit that it's trying to put on.
Yeah, I would say aside from your macronutrients, your NP and K, the second thing, like the second group of things that you can give your plant where it's really, really going to help you, and you will see it happen in especially tomatoes, is CalMag. There's a lot of CalMag products out there. It does a ton for your plant. It strengthens your plant. It, like Kirk said, it helps you transport the nutrients that you're feeding. And so I would say, aside from your just general fertilizers, CalMag is your next one in line where just make sure you have it in there.
Sure. And this brings us to the last stage of a plant's life. And this isn't even like listed in most places, but I feel like it's important for us to talk about because there are many people that are getting into gardening for the first time. And they don't realize that there are most vegetable garden plants that you're going to grow, they go through this last stage, which is senescence. Essentially, the plant is starting to die back. This is a natural part of most vegetable gardens. Let's like Zach mentioned with the cucumber. Once your cucumber has put out the amount of cucumbers that you know, it was able to put out based off of its nutrient and all of the uptake and upkeep and everything that you've done for it, it will start to just die. And it's just natural. It's just part of the process. Um, and so this is when, don't panic. This is just part of the process. This is the circle of life, as
Mhm.
they say. It needs less water. You'll see browning leaves. Some of the fruit will start to deform a little bit near the end of its life. A lot of times, like let's say cucumbers will start to get a little wonky looking.
Mhm.
Um, And so again, this is just signs that it has done what it's going to do, and it's time to move on to better things.
Yeah. So think of a plant kind of, it has so much it can do. A good example of this one is bell peppers. We have a lot of people coming in and be like, I only got like 3 bell peppers. That's kind of just how much they can do. Bell pepper is a really big fruit. It takes a lot of energy for them to kind of get that fully mature and everything like that. And so once your bell pepper puts out 3 to 6 bell peppers, most of the time that's all the energy it has. That's all it's got to give you. It put out these bell peppers. It's assuming so in its natural situation, it would have put those out. for sure, some of those seeds would have germinated, and so it would have continued on. We change all that, we're gonna eat the fruit and not necessarily let it just get planted and start again, but in the end, it did what it was trying to do. If it ends up, like, producing fruit, it has accomplished its goal as an annual plant, and it has reproduced, it has given its genetics a chance to live on, and it's now ready to take the boat to the elves' place in Lord of the Rings. It's just it's ready for the end. And we bring that up because, yeah, we had somebody who was freaking out because their plant died. It's like, I mean, it's kind of just part of it. And senescence is also really cool because there's also times where senescence is not the plant dying. So, and also I will say, in all of the every time I heard this referred to when I was taking the classes, if you let your plant get a disease and die, that is not senescence. This is senescence as in the plant stage. So it has
Mhm.
reproduced, it has lived its full life. Senescence does not mean anytime your plant dies. It is part of a natural plant process. So a cool version of this, though, is every time you see those fall leaves, that is a version of senescence, because what it's doing is it's essentially killing off those leaves and taking that, essentially all that nutrient from those leaves, back into the tree and into the roots, because it's about to have to overwinter. So it's taking all of the extra food that it has available, it's pulling it back into itself, and it's going to basically go dormant until spring. So there's all these kind of cool variations on how senescence happens. And so, yeah, your large trees out in, like, kind of think the Smokies and everything like that, they aren't going to die, but they do perform some, like, version of senescence on their leaves.
Yeah, and that's another thing that happens to a lot of plants is they do act differently around winter time. Not as much in our area. We do have some plants that we grow that still do show signs of overwintering themselves. Let's say ginger or turmeric or a peach, things like that. They go through a dormant phase. The one that's wild, the most wild to me, is the ginger or turmeric,
Mhm.
because that will be a beautiful plant, looks awesome, and then it looks like it completely died. I mean, you can't see anything.
But if you go and dig around in there, you will find it. But it 100% dies to the ground. So if you're growing ginger or turmeric at home and that's your first time, there will be no green anything above the ground once it gets cold outside. And so you just have to wait until spring, and then you will see it putting up those little fronds all over again.
Yep, I have a giant white turmeric in my backyard, and it looks like it's just dying right now.
Mhm.
But it's just doing its thing. It's going through its dormant phase. Same with the peach. Peach will lose all of its leaves. It will look like it's just a stick, and then the spring rolls around, and it'll flush back out.
All right. As always, we like to take a little second here to talk about the place where we work. Fantastic group of people at
Mhm.
Grace's Garden Center. They have all kinds of stuff. If you are interested in getting started in gardening at any level, they probably have exactly what you need. And that's not even including all the information.
Yeah, for sure. And not only do we have a really great in-person shop, and we offer in-person one-on-one essentially classes. We also do classes,
Consultation.
but consultations and stuff like that. But we also do have a small online presence. So if you are out of state and you are looking to buy nutrients that you just can't find in your local big box store, or, Ace Hardware, we might have it on our website. It's graceshydro.com, I believe. And so, yeah, if you live in the Tampa Bay area, we'd love to see you in person. But if not, reach out through our online presence, and we would love to help you there as well. All right, one other thing we wanted to talk about was kind of like the different categories that plants can have, which then essentially assign how those stages that we just discussed previously affect the plant.
Mhm.
Um, and so the first category is annuals, and this is what we were talking about with cucumbers, where it is a one shot, one deal. When it's done creating its babies, when it's done, giving you the fruit, it is just gonna die, and that's just the way it is. And that is considered an annual plant, meaning you have to replant it every year. Uh, Cucurbits, so that's all your squashes, some of your melons, your cucumbers, things like that. Tomatoes, as we discussed as well. Most peppers, this one is a little bit of kind of an exception because some of the super hots you can overwinter and you can keep them for years. It seems like for some reason that the super hots tend to do it easier than the sweet. The
Mhm.
sweet peppers don't tend to do that as much. Sweet peppers are kind of like one and done. You'll see them start to senesce no matter what you do. Um, Most root vegetables fall into this category, but not all of them. We'll get to some of those in a little bit. Most flowers as well fall into the annuals category. And then lastly, almost all of the brassicas. So you got your cauliflower, you got your cabbage, you got your broccoli, and things like that. Not all of them. We'll talk about one or two that don't, they kind of are an exception to the rule. But yeah, that's the first category of plants. And obviously there's others that fall into this category. We were just trying to give you the top 10 like
Mhm.
kind of overview of most common garden plants and where they fall into this category.
Yeah, and on the non-edible side of things, many of your flowers and things like that are going to be, annual. So a lot of times, like your petunias and stuff like that, you're buying for your garden, those are gonna need to be replaced season after season, which is great. Honestly, it keeps everything looking good. But then you get to perennials, which just means that they don't complete their entire life cycle in 1 year. There's a lot of times where it varies on how long they can keep going if you were to just give them ideal conditions. Because so asparagus is a really interesting one. If you plant asparagus seeds, it normally is going to take you about 3 years until you start getting asparagus. But once you do that, then you get asparagus all the time. Then it just keeps coming back. It's also the funniest plant. If you've never looked up what asparagus looks like growing, it looks fake.
It looks fake. It looks like you've CGI'd some asparagus in the dirt and
Yeah, it
just
looks like
like
someone went and stuck asparagus from the grocery store in the dirt. It 100% that is just how it grows though. Not at the very beginning. It almost looks like kind of like a fern.
fern. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. But asparagus is a very popular perennial because once you give it that time and get it established, then you just always have asparagus. And it's not like year round, but it's more just you get, I think, a couple flushes a
Hmm.
year, and you will essentially just have that available from then on out. Some varieties of herbs are also really good at essentially keeping going. I think of things like rosemary and some of your mint varieties, and those are also great for that. And there's also an exception on this next part coming up. Fruit trees are very common perennial. That's one
Hmm.
that most people associate with the kind of the perennial nature, which just means they're going to give you fruit year after year. They're gonna just put on their fruits and flowers, and then they're gonna go through other stages of the life cycle, and eventually they will kind of like tap out. But a lot of times it takes many years for a fruit tree to actually go through its entire life cycle. And then artichokes is another popular one. Same with Jerusalem artichokes, which
Hmm.
I was reading about that one, and that's super interesting. It's more closely related to a sunflower than it is an artichoke, and it was something that the Native Americans used a very long time ago. So that's another cool one. But yeah, think of things that are kind of like they have some underground tuber action going on, and a lot of times that is going to make them perennial. Ginger and turmeric are also in that category where they will put on tubers and they just kind of have a different cycle that's much longer.
Yeah. And one or two of the other plants that I was thinking of in our area that we really like are like cranberry hibiscus,
Mhm.
roselle, uh, things like that. They tend to come back, every season. They might get, bit by the frost or
They
something
do
like
not
that,
like the freeze at all.
but they grow right back. Same with like moringa, things like that.
Mhm.
And then there's one category that is very interesting. We were doing a little bit of extra research the other day about it, and that's biennial plants. Now, that's where a lot of the exceptions come from here is like we were talking about brassicas, but yet cabbage is a biennial. We were talking about herbs, but yet parsley is a biennial. Carrots, again, we were talking about root crops being annuals. Most root crops are, except for some like carrots, onions, and beets, they can be biennials. And kale is another one that can be a biennial.
I'll throw this out there. The only time this really matters for you is if you're trying to get seeds. because that's all
Yes.
that's implying is year 2 is when they fruit and flower. So nobody's really looking for cabbage flowers, which is why we essentially plant cabbage. Once it has the nice head on it, we take it, the end. So we don't let it get through its entire life cycle before we harvest it. And that is a different thing. You don't always harvest at the very end of the life cycle. It can vary wildly depending on what you're doing. Same thing with carrots and onions. Nobody's really doing that for the seed or for the fruit. They're doing it for the tuber. So when it's in that heavy vegetative growth and it's filling out those tubers, as soon as it gets to a place that's good for us harvest wise, we just take it. No, and I was wondering about parsley because I had some parsley that was doing great. Last year, it just like flowered and it died. And it's like, oh, that makes sense now.
So yeah, see, we're always learning new things by experience as well. That's just part of it. Um, so yeah, that is the different categories that plants will be in, and that kind of gives you a better idea of the stages that we discussed at the first part of the episode. And one other thing we wanted to mention is another useful tool to have in your tool bag for your garden. And one of these is a jeweler's loop. Now, this is that essentially a little eyepiece so that you can look at the leaves very close up.
Yeah, a little
Um,
tiny magnifying glass is a good way to
yeah,
think of it. If you look it up on Amazon, they're all over the place.
I know a lot of the like trade shows and stuff that I've gone to that have anything to do with agriculture. That'd be like something that they'd be giving out for free is like really cheap ones. But yeah, it's just a really nice thing to have. They also make digital ones now that you can like look at a leaf under a mini microscope that's connected to your phone. You can take pictures, videos, and stuff like that. They're really cool. Not super expensive. They've kind of gone down a lot in price, but it's a very useful thing to have so that you can identify pests, you can identify diseases that are really hard to see what the issue is with the naked eye.
Some of these pests are very small, and the only way you're really going to be able to see them is with something like this, some kind of magnification. So yeah, that is a really good tool to kind of have at your disposal in case you just want to be able to check things out. And then we wanted to bring in another question that we find very, very commonly up at the shop. This is one
Mhm.
that's a little nuanced, but we just wanted to kind of have the conversation with you. We hear a lot of people asking us, how often do I fertilize? And that is, there's a million kind of variables that affect how this question is answered. But in general, I would say the vast majority of the population underfeed, especially if you're growing organically. Let's say this: synthetics, you want to make sure you are doing exactly what the label says. You
Mhm.
do not want to go over. You want to make sure your dilution is right. You do not want to over apply synthetic fertilizer because you can very easily burn and then kill your plant. On the organic side, you have a lot more leeway. You have a lot
Yes.
more flexibility there. And honestly, what we have found very effective for us is overfeeding at some level so that you're not ever trying to catch up. You want this stuff to be building up and available in the soil so the plant can use it as you need to, because it's not a quick reaction like it is with synthetics. And so I would say vast majority of people are under fertilizing. What do you think, Kirk?
Yeah, no, I think that I mentioned it previously on another episode is I was very surprised by how many people have come into the store new to gardening and they didn't realize at all, sometimes after their first season, that they needed to feed their plants at all. They just thought, and I get it now, understanding the basic things that you learn at school, you learn about photosynthesis and stuff like that, but you're not really learning too much about anything past photosynthesis. So you
Mhm.
think this plant, all it needs is sunlight and water and it's good to go. Sure, it will stay alive, but if you're trying to get production off of a plant, you got to feed it. And a lot of people don't. Again, I've just been very surprised by how many people don't even know you have to feed at all, much less um, it has been something that I've seen over and over where a customer will be like, wow, I've got to feed it that much. I'm like, well, yeah, if you want it to feed you, you've got to feed it. It's just part of the way it is. It's a transaction. The better you take care of your plant, the higher chance that you are going to get the production that you're looking for as a consumer. But yeah, no, I think that most people tend to underfeed, especially in the organic field.
Mhm.
And because like Zach said, I came from a conventional farming background, so we would essentially spoon feed. the plant throughout its whole life cycle. We'd be feeding 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a week just with our regular watering. But it was very small amounts and it would be extremely bioavailable to the plant. The first time we did organic tomatoes, we were chasing fertility the entire time because you can't spoon feed organic uh, nutrients to a plant and it be bioavailable immediately. You have to have had the nutrients in the soil starting to break down, working with the microbes, working with the biology underneath the soil to be able to become bioavailable to the plant. So, like Zach said, it's very important to when you're doing it organically to kind of be ahead of the fertility rather than allow it to get in front of you.
So, yeah, to answer the question, I would say a good starting place, try to throw out some fertilizer once a week. And if you do that, then you're probably not going to get behind on anything. So that's a little excessive. Could you do less than that? Absolutely, you could. But that's just, and that's mostly based on how we like to do it, is we like to have one day a week where we do heavy fertilization for everything. We have one day a week where we like to go out there and do a bug spray. They're good rules of thumbs so that you can kind of have a general idea. Each week I need to find a day to do these two things. So yeah, if your plant ends up asking for more food, you can absolutely do another day. But I would bet for most people in their first time gardening, if they were to go out and feed once a week, it's going to be hugely like improved growing.
No, I agree with you completely. I think that once a week, maybe at the beginning, you kind of get when you're creating your soil, put some heavy stuff, like let's say some dolomite lime at the beginning of the season, or a Happy Frog soil conditioner. Like that's something that we recommend a lot for people that are using a bed that they've used the previous season, and that'll just help you get ahead of the nutrition at the beginning, and then you can just feed throughout once a week, and that's what we do. Like Zach said. But it also depends on your plant and your scenario. Like we were talking about plants that go dormant. You do not need to feed during a dormant period of any kind of plant that goes through that period of dormancy, because it just basically means it's asleep. It's not doing anything. In fact, the more you water it, the more you give it stuff, the higher chance that there could be issues later on down the road because it is not absorbing as much water. It's kind of think of like a bear that goes into hibernation in the winter. That's essentially what your plant is doing. A great example for us that is new to us is we had a customer, because we've had a lot of customers come in asking for carnivorous plants. And so we had a customer bring us some Venus flytraps, and we broke them into smaller, or, into individual pots and stuff like that. But he showed us that these plants were like quadruple the size before the winter came. And he said that what Venus flytraps do is they senesce all the way down to the soil, and then that's all that's alive. It's just like a few little mouths sticking out of the dirt. It looks weird. They look tiny, but yet you can tell by the rhizome, this is a pretty big plant. And that's what he said. He said when the spring rolls around again, they'll start flushing back out and they get big again. So it all depends on your situation. Same with, like, let's say a fruit tree. It's very important to fertilize during the fruiting and flowering time, more important than throughout the rest of its life. Maybe it's key to hit them with some nitrogen and stuff right when the spring starts so that they can have a good flush right before they go into production. But I think that it's important just to kind of know what plant we're talking about when we're talking about how often to fertilize. Regular garden beds, 100%, once a week if you can. That's a great rule of thumb. When you get into fruit trees and things that can go dormant and things like that, gets a little bit more nuanced. Yeah, just do a tiny little bit of cursory research and you'll find the sweet spot for your plants. Well, all right, guys, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate every single one of you. Hit us with that rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Y'all have a great week. And remember, be kind to one another.
And there is no such thing as a black thumb.